Alright, so we've played through about 91 frames here, and you really can kind of get an idea of what's going on here, and it's really starting to come together here, so I'm pretty happy with that. And I really like how the shredding is giving it some more breakup on the edges, but it's not too much in that it looks unnatural. If we kind of go ahead to our Fireball import here, we can kind of just take a look better at the shading here. So by default we've got the import fire fields is importing all of our attributes. So we've got density, velocity, flame, and temperature. And now we're viewing it here, and this is a new node in Houdini 18. We can set up our shading parameters here, and then afterwards we can choose to create a material. And this is really nice as it's going to create a pyro material based on all these look settings and attach that for us. But essentially, you know, maybe I'm just going to dial this back so we can view this a bit better. And that's pretty good for now. I'm just going to dial in our ramp here. So if you watched any of my previous tutorials, you know that there's a few starting points that I like to start at here. I like to have a transparency within the fire. So by the time we get to the end of our ramp, the hottest part, I like to dial that down to give it a transparent flame look. And this will enable us to really just pull out a lot more detail in those areas. And we can kind of create some spikes in the ramp as well. Alright, so now we can view this a little bit better, change the adaptation and the burn, the areas of the hotness and all that. We can play around with this, but really I just wanted to do something really quick so I can see kind of what is actually in the flame there. So I know that, yeah, indeed, I could pull out some of this detail I can pull out in rendering. So I know there's enough detail in there. Okay. Finally, maybe I'll change the color of the smoke to be something quite a bit lighter. And there we have it. So I'm pretty happy with this. So I really encourage you to get to know the settings better, really kind of get in there and learn how each of the settings and the burn rates and that work together, the temperature, change the breakup and the disturbance, offset the particles to break things up even further. You can see that if we offset this before, we can break up that plume maybe, and really get a simulation that you like. And when you're done, we're going to go ahead and cache this out. So for the final resolution, I found that with my RAM, I'm going to push the final resolution voxel size to 0.07. And this got me a sim in about 12 hours. But by reducing the voxel size to 0.7, I'm going to reduce everything, make sure that my scale, my threshold width thin, I can put this down to 0.7. And the gas disturb, I'm going to leave at 0.1. And the overall shredding in the overall fluid, I can leave that at 0.1. I'm just finally giving it more resolution. And once you're happy with it, let's set this off for a sim. Let's throw down a file cache. And let's write this whole thing out. So I've already done this. And if we take a look here, this is my final sim. By adjusting all these parameters, I'm really getting some high detail fluid here. Because you can get a lot of detail first in those shredding and disturbance parameters without ever going in, without fully increasing the resolution so much. So we want to make sure we're being really efficient. And here's a final flipbook of our simulation till about frame 185. So I'm really happy with the way this is turning out, and we can really see the detail in the fire, in the plumes. We got some good breakup. It's breaking up. The wind is breaking up, pushing it to the right. And I really like how these bits of debris are shooting off some really kind of billowy smoke. And there's a ton of detail in there. And we're going to get more detail when it comes to rendering. So go ahead, play around with the settings. Make sure your sims are efficient. And let's go ahead and cache that out. All right, so now that we're back, let's go ahead and set this up for a render. So if we just kind of view what we have here, let's bring the camera up. Let's go to a frame maybe that we like. Here we go. So the one thing we want to do, we've got some kind of go-to render settings here. Let's go to our mantra node here. And I'm just make sure we're rendering in 720p. Let's go to our render tab. We want to make sure we're on physically based rendering. And I'm going to keep the volume limit to 0. If we turn this to 1, then all of a sudden Mantra is going to be rendering with volumetric scattering. And it's really expensive. Looks great, but it's really expensive. I'm going to use just the volume light to kind of mimic the volume scattering, and it's going to make it a lot cheaper and quicker. So I'm going to keep that at 0. Let's go to the sampling parameters. Maybe I can turn this up to 5 and 5. And I just like to keep the max raise samples at 6 and the noise at 0.2. This will quicken things up. Furthermore, if we want it to be a little quicker, we could reduce the volume quality, something like 0.5, but this should be fine for this. We'll leave that at 1. So our mantra node's set up. Let's go to our object. And again, in the volume, the post-process here, we've got to look for fluid. Looks pretty great. What we can do is select create matching material. That's going to automatically now create a pyro shader, and it's going to add it in here with all the settings that we previously placed up here. And our smoke field, everything, our flame field is in there with the ramp that we produced, and everything is set up just as we had it in the viewport. So that's really nice. So that's a good starting point. So we've got a shader attached. Let's go to our fireball import. I just like to attach it here in the material tab as well. Let's grab our pyro shader. All right, so now we just need to add a volume light. Let's select our fireball import here. Let's go to lights, and then we're going to select volume light. And that's going to add light from our flames and illuminate the smoke. And I'm going to keep the intensity at 1, and I'm going to keep everything kind of default at 1. Make sure it's grabbing that pyro shader, and make sure it's on our fireball import here. Alright, so I'm just going to make sure, let's turn everything off. We can render the mountain for reference just with gray, and we've got our skylight, sunlight, pretty good. Let's go ahead to our render view, into our camera 1. I'm just going to take a full render. I'm not going to use the IPR here. And I'm going to take a full render. Alright, so our render is not even 1 minute in, and she's almost finished. And you can see all sorts of detail in here. I'm pretty happy with the render side of things. So you can see from the ramp a lot of the detail that we're getting in our fire here. Maybe I'm just going to do another render, and let's zoom in quite a bit so we can really see the fire there. And we can really see that ramp, and by bringing that ramp to almost 0 towards the hottest parts of the fire, we're creating all this extra detail in the flames. So here we go. We can see the flames a bit better, and if we kind of lower the brightness a bit, you can see how much is really going on there. And there's so much detail. We can see the illumination of the smoke. We need to increase the quality, but all the information is in there that we can pull out for compositing. And finally, let's bring this back to full real-world scale. And in our Fireball import, we can just go down here and throw down a transform. Remember, we transformed it down by 10. We can transform it now up by 10 units. And turn off the mountain collide, kind of zoom out, press space G, and we'll center now the entire shot. You can really see all this detail in this explosion. It looks great. And if we turn back our original terrain mountain, this now pops into place. So there we have it. Let's go ahead and set up the render for everything.